welcome back to the Liberation Hour. I'm so happy to have y'all here today. This is Comrade Felicity coming at you live from WRFU 104.5 Radio Free Urbana. Yes, today it is October 8th. Shout out to my best friend. She knows who she is. It is her birthday today. She is 23. Happy birthday to you, my good friend. I will not name her as she has not consented to that, but if you're listening, I love you. All right, and it is time for the top of the hour disclaimer. WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community, online community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU UCIMC. Folks, welcome back to the Liberation Hour. I am going to be riffing a little bit more today because we have some pretty pertinent topics. We have a lot going on. As many of you probably know, we have the government has shut down, unfortunately. Don't exactly it's been interesting, I have to say. We probably have been seeing the news and all of that. But folks, in this time of severe the unknown, essentially, I want people to remember that while this is most certainly not a good thing, so many people are out of work. They are out of, they are working without pay because they are essential workers. I want everyone to understand that while this is the case, that we should be taking this opportunity as well to start building more and more community solidarity. This is not a good thing, this government shutdown. So many people are out of work, but understanding that we can find solidarity in each other is the first step. This is the first step to a larger, broader change. Because understand that this is not the first time, of course, that the government has shut down, and it will not be the last. And so, especially as ICE, kidnaps our neighbors, and essentially acts as the Gestapo for the fascist regime, I implore everyone to please, support your neighbors who are currently out of work or are working with no pay. Support local unions, especially support the unionized workers of the federal government, who I was in Chicago earlier in the day for an unrelated event. But I met up with some comrades and we went to basically a rally that federal workers did in Chicago. Pritzker was there. We are not a supporter of Pritzker on this channel. I understand that he does have some things that he does that are all right. But the man is still a billionaire, and we do not support billionaires on this channel. Thank you. Please and thank you. So, I went to this rally, and, people are angry. Rightfully so, by the way, because their lives are currently being upended and completely destroyed by what this government shutdown means. And understand that while I am not a supporter of the Democrats in any sense of the word, the reason that the Democrats have not agreed to the budget is in part due to the fact that the Republican Party wants to cut health care for so many people. I am a firm anti-Democrat, if that's what you could call me. But I do understand why this is happening. And it is because Republicans are currently trying to pass a budget which would cut healthcare and benefits for so many people. And we have to remember this. Do not become entrenched in the throes of propaganda. We cannot allow propaganda and at least propaganda for the Republican or the Democratic Party. Do not become engaged with the kinds of propaganda that are trying to dissuade you from holding the government accountable for what it has been doing to its people. As we know, yesterday was October 7th, which it marks the 2-year anniversary of the active genocide that has been happening in the Gaza Strip. However, this goes back much further than just 2 years ago. The people of Gaza have been actively victimized and are being brutally murdered by the Israeli state, and this has been happening for over 77 years at this point. This quote-unquote war is not a war. It is an active genocide. If we want to bring in the story of David and Goliath, the Palestinians are currently David. You can literally see photos of Palestinian teenagers and young people throwing rocks at tanks, at Israeli tanks that are currently wreaking havoc in Gaza City. Understand this, folks. There is no justice, there is no peace, while the people of Palestine, the people of Sudan, the people of the Congo, while all oppressed people, all people under colonization, are still suffering under these systems. There is no peace until the proletariat unifies and comes together and liberates ourselves from these conditions. Understand this. The people of Palestine will be free by any means necessary. And I will take absolutely no Zionist talking points, no Zionist propaganda, none. Zionism is Nazism. Zionism, as all forms of nationalism are seeking to exterminate an entire ethnic group of people. And we cannot allow this. No. And I of course, I need to reiterate this because I will always be, as any leftist, as any pro-Palestinian anti-Zionist is always accused of, no, I am not anti-Semitic. Of course, we uphold Jewish safety in any space which is truly leftist. But I am not going to center the voices and the lives of Israelis and Jewish people at large when there is an entire genocide happening to Palestinians at the hands of Jewish nationalism. We cannot support that. Of course, we support the safety of Jewish people to live anywhere that they like. But nobody, absolutely nobody, is entitled to ethnically cleanse and forcefully displace anybody from their home. And this is what the Israelis have been doing for years at this point. It did not start on October 7th of 2023. No, this story goes back decades. And understand this. If we are to find true liberation, this also means understanding that people can change. And those who have been supporting Zionist causes, who have been using Zionist talking points as a means to disparage and denounce the movement of the freedom of Palestine, can change their minds. But we must also hold them accountable for the rhetoric which they have used, which has actively hurt the lives of Palestinian people. I will always be a supporter of Palestinian freedom, point blank. And marking these 2 years since the genocide, the act of genocide began, we must understand that I do not denounce Hamas in any sense, not a bit. I will not denounce an entire group who is currently fighting for the freedom. They are freedom fighters for Palestinian people. Do I support everything Hamas says? Absolutely not. But I understand that currently, when it comes to an active genocide, I'm not going to tell people who are fighting against their colonizers that they need to stop fighting because I ideologically differ from them in certain circumstances. This is not that. I am not going to do that. I support fully the liberation of Palestinian people. I support giving them their land back, and I do not support a two-state solution, and here's why. The two-state solution is never going to come to pass because the foundation of the Israeli state is that of a colonizer state. They have essentially it's settler colonialism, and there is no peace for Palestinians while the Israeli state continues to exist. Jewish people lived in Palestine prior to the Zionists showing up. And that is because it was a multicultural, multi-ethnic, oh geez, I hit the side of my mic. It was a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious space in which people lived together. People who practiced Christianity, people who practiced Judaism, people who practiced Islam, lived together in Palestine, and they called themselves Palestinians. Interesting, right? When Zionists showed up to Palestine, specifically, those who founded the state of Palestine, the state of Israel, those who founded it, did so in a way, and did so with such emphasis on specifically colonizing the space with European Jews. Why exactly? Because the colonization of Palestine is, and the creation of the state of Israel, is specifically so Western powers have a presence in the Middle East. And America wasn't like Israel's biggest defender until around the 60s. But even so, before them it was Britain who supported the Israeli state. And it is because they wanted access to the rich supply of oil in the Middle East and to have a physical presence in this space adjacent to Iran and in Egypt and all of these other Middle Eastern powers that have their own natural resources. Folks, this is imperialism. This is imperialism that is happening right now. And it has been happening for years. And it's so important to understand the actual motors and the means as to why this is happening and the end goal. The end goal is to have a presence, not only a presence in the Middle East, but is to essentially take over and install whoever will be friendly to Western powers. I talk about this all the time, but the overthrowing of a democratically elected leader in Iran in the 70s, his name escapes me. Let me just actively look this man up. Overthrown 70s. I should know this. But basically, a democratically elected leader of Iran, elected in the 60s, late 60s, I believe, early 70s, I could be wrong. And essentially, he wasn't even that much of a socialist. He just wanted to nationalize Iranian oil and keep the grubby hands of the British off of it, so that the people of Iran could actually benefit from the massive amounts of oil that exist there. And of course, imperial Western powers could not have this. So what did they do? Violently overthrew, the CIA especially helped violently overthrow the Iranian state and install the Shah, who was a brutal dictator. And this eventually set the stage for the revolution that happened later, in which the Shah had to escape. But this right here is proof, is understanding that because, of course, the Shah was going to be friendly to Western powers and allow them to have access to the rich amount of natural resources that exist in this area, of course, Western powers wanted him in power and did not want actual Iranian sovereignty over their own natural resource. This was bound to happen, and it happens every time. It is why when people tell me, and I have people tell me this a lot, they say, Comrade, and they don't really call me Comrade, but I like to call myself that in these instances when I recount them. But they say, Comrade, the revolution can't start here. The revolution is going to start somewhere else. Because, we've exploited the global south so much and it's been so terrible. And I say, Comrade, I understand why you may say that, because especially here in the imperial core, we are extremely propagandized to believe we're so propagandized against communist ideas, against socialism, against, class revolution and everything. And then I say to that, people who tell me, well, the revolution can't start here, it has to start somewhere else. I say, sure, maybe the revolution could start somewhere else. And if it does, we should play a supporting role. But we cannot discount the working people of America. We cannot discount the fact that material conditions are still deteriorating, that the global south does not simply exist in the countries which we quote unquote call third world, which is not the proper term for this. While there is massive poverty in other countries which we have actively exploited and plundered, there is also massive poverty here in the United States. If you live in a major city or even a minor city, even a small city, you've probably seen homeless folks walking around, actively searching for food and shelter and anything that will just get them by for a day. If you are someone who has to work for a living and you let's say a medical emergency or your car breaks down happens, could you afford the $600 that it could cost to or more to just fix that and go on with your life? A lot of Americans can't. And this is why I say the revolution has just as much of a chance to happen here as it does anywhere. Material conditions are still deteriorating in a different way, and that is why we must analyze it and understanding that the unique conditions that exist here in the United States, we must fully understand in order to allow for an actual workers' revolution to take place. Do not lose hope. Do not lose hope in the face of extreme fascism. I understand how it feels to get fed up and angry and just say, screw it. I'm just not going to do anything. I'm just gonna continue with my life and just hope that things get better. But and just give in denialism because it makes me feel better right now. But I implore you, stop and ask yourself, why am I saying this? And in the long run, in the future for my community, how will I have contributed to the larger movement? I understand how it feels right now to want to look away and walk away because it's hard, but understand that it will not always be this way, and that it is not only about you as an individual, it is about us, all of us, together, moving forward, finding solidarity. It doesn't just start with community organizing. It also starts with educating yourself politically, understanding how, for example, other communist countries have actually worked, moving past the ideas that we have been inundated with here in the States for so long, that communism is when no iPhone, communism is when no food. Truly, earnestly seeking out education, reaching out to folks who are already educated on these topics, like members of the American Party of Labor, and understanding that it feels so impossible right now, but it's not. It isn't. A workers' revolution, a true state for working people by working people, is not impossible. The Soviet Union proved that. Lenin, Marx, Stalin, Engels, they proved, well, more like Lenin and Stalin, proved that these things are possible. And it takes not only solidarity, but discipline and principles. We cannot give in to nihilism, and we cannot give in to our own, our own proclivity towards turning away and saying it's too hard. There's plenty of things in life that are going to be hard. Showing up for your neighbors, showing up for your people, showing up for fellow working people, it is not nearly as hard as dealing with fascism will be. I understand. I truly get it. I do. There are days that I don't want to get out of bed. But we must not give in to nihilism. We must not give in to feeling as though our own individual addition to the revolution doesn't matter. It does. You as an individual matter as much as the collective does. I believe it was Che Guevara that said this, and one of my comrades in an upcoming episode will probably, I think he said this during the recording. He said, the life of one person is worth more than all of the property in the world. You as an individual will always matter to the collective and the working people. To the capitalist, you're just another cog in the machine. You deserve better. We deserve better. And it's why in these last 10 minutes before I play my recording about Antifa, the first 30 minutes, I want to talk about reform. I've talked about this a little bit, about the mayoral race in New York, as it's being closely watched by many on the national stage and the international stage, because of the very, this up-and-coming candidate, Zoran Mamdani. And on this channel, we are a supporter of Zoran Mamdani, with a caveat. Zoran Mamdani is not a socialist. I will maintain this. I wrote an article about this in the American Party of Labor's Red Phoenix, and I will continue to maintain everything that I said in that article. Zoran Mamdani is a reformist, and it may seem really enticing to go along with reformist ideas because of how, because they look really polished and pretty, and they look extremely, they give off this air that, if we vote hard enough and we organize enough within the system, that we can change the system from the ground up. The problem with this thinking, of course, is that it is negating the entire idea and the reality that this system is rotten to its very core. I understand how it feels to want to look away from the idea of a revolution in favor of reform, feeling as though it would be a more constructive way and a less violent way to go about changing this system. But understand that there is systemic violence every day at the hands of the capitalist. And that moneyed interest will never let true reform happen when all they have to do is call up their favorite representative that they've been paying under the table to shoot down a bill or a budget or anything that could benefit working people. I understand the feeling that reform can actually bring fruitful change, but this is not true, and it is frankly a cop-out. Doing reform, especially those of us not us, I do not want reform, especially those who, are quite comfortable in life, reform can seem like, well, I don't have to lose anything. Well, actually, you still will, because the capitalist will never stop trying to and successfully exploiting under the system of capitalism. Capitalism will never allow reform to happen because the capitalist is fully empowered under the system to shoot down any possible reform that could happen. There's no political outmaneuvering a system which is completely entrenched in global finance, capital, imperialism, you name it. It is entrenched in it, which is why on this show we advocate for a workers' revolution. I'm not trying to, this is not a call to action. Do not attack any of your representatives. That would suck. Don't do that. All I'm saying is that when the conditions are right, we must act. We must go forward and fight for each other. Build a worker state by working people, because this will not only empower the collective, this will empower the individual towards further self-actualization. And it's, like I said, reform it's very shiny and pretty, and it looks super enticing, but it's really ignoring the larger modes and motors of production, and essentially saying, well, we can just vote our way out of this. There is no voting your way out of systemic violence. If the capitalist wants to exploit you for all you're worth, the capitalist will just do that, because capitalism empowers them to do that. That is what the system says to do. The system itself is saying to do these things. The system, capitalism, cannot be reformed to be better capitalism. Which is why we must make the explicit move towards communism. And it's why, reformists, they want to make that move through the system of capitalism. And I say capitalism will never allow that. That is not how the game is played. You're trying to play ball with a team that is basically just doing steroids, and there's no laws against it because they make the rules. Like, we're playing a completely uneven game right now, which is why working people must come together, not only organizing with your local community, organizing with principled communists, principled folk who understand the theory. And you might say, well, comrade, theory doesn't matter. It absolutely does matter. And I say that as someone who hates reading theory. I hate it. It is not my favorite thing to do. I like when my boyfriend reads it to me because I don't actually have to read it, but I am not a theory head myself. But even I understand and I recognize that theory is still extremely important in understanding how these things actually come to pass and how they happen. And what's the big idea here? Theory is not saying that you need to follow this exact blueprint and you need to follow these exact steps. Theory is giving us a framework and a baseline to work off of. Which is why, as Marxists, we use dialectical materialism and historical materialism to understand the world, because it is truly a universal idea. You can apply it anywhere you go, and understanding the unique material conditions, because it's going to be different wherever you go. The unique material conditions of any city, any town, any country, any group of people, it's always going to be different. And so we must, I highly recommend folks actually read Stalin's work on dialectical materialism. He writes it in a very, I would say really most of Stalin's work I have to recommend, because he writes in a very straightforward, understandable way. He's not writing to impress a bunch of other academics. Stalin was writing to convey ideas and information to the party of the time. And we can look at this now in the modern era and still glean so much important information from what he was saying, from what Lenin was saying, and from what Marx and Engels were saying. Understanding these frameworks and these basic ideas is what gives us the larger movement, is what allows us to organize the larger movement. And it's why we must reject revisionism as well. I will say I'm about to go ahead and start playing my the segment, but one last note here is it's why we must never give in to revisionism, because it has ultimately been fruitless. Reject Trotskyism, reject Khrushchevism, because these ideas are inherently is what caused not Trotskyism specifically, but revisionist ideas around Marxism-Leninism is what caused further chaos and turmoil in communist countries. Albania was holding it down for years under Hoxha, because he was an anti-revisionist. And the data and the evidence speaks for itself. So folks, it is almost 7:30, so I'm going to go ahead and start playing my next segment on Antifa. And just a little I guess a little background. This was my discussion with Comrades Red and Monty from Maryland and New York, respectively. We had a really lovely conversation, and this is the first 30 minutes of that, in which we talk all things Antifa. We discuss, what is Antifa exactly, and this is coming right off the heels of the terrorism designation that Antifa has been given, strangely enough, because, of course, Trump would do that, which is not surprising, but we basically discussed what is Antifa actually, and why is this terrorist designation not only so stupid, but also kind of dangerous. So I'm super excited to play this for you guys. Let me go ahead and pull this up and
intro. So today we're going to be talking about anti-fascism and
Okay, so while Monty gets their drink, I'm going to go ahead and just do a little intro. So today we're going to be talking about anti-fascism and the terrorist designation of the organization Antifa, which I think that starting out this conversation, I should just say first that Antifa is not a centralized organization. Antifa does not have a leader. Antifa is not like a party. Antifa is it is specifically meant to combat fascist rallies, fascist um, like regimes and fascist movements. Think a good example of this would be the Unite the Right rally in 2017 in Charlottesville. That is specifically a fascist organization and a fascist rally. Those who showed up to counter protest and to break up the Unite the Right rally would be anti-fascists. Because Unite the Right specifically was about uniting all of these different white supremacists, white Christian nationalists, and other nationalist groups who all kind of fall under this, like, first of all, very pro-Trump banner, but also extremely reactionary. And some of them are specifically neo-Nazis who identify specifically with the Nazi movement. And all of these groups kind of fall under this banner of what I would call American fascism, but I understand comrades might have pushback against that. But essentially, anti-fascism is countering those fascist rallies that pop up. Anti-fascism is not it is an ongoing thing, but again, it's not a centralized organization. And we're talking about this today specifically to highlight um, how this terrorist designation is not only, I would say, kind of silly because it makes no sense, but also how it's also very concerning because to specifically designate anti-fascism as a terrorist organization would ostensibly be calling the anti-fascists of World War II, which would be our grandparents, as terrorists. And because these folks were specifically fighting against the Nazis who explicitly called themselves fascists. And so now calling anti-fascism a terrorist organization and designating it as terrorism is essentially calling the regime calling itself a fascist one. And I continue to make this argument because it's important to recognize what fascism actually looks like. Today, they're not going to necessarily call themselves fascist. They're just going to do the fascist action. So I'm joined today by comrades Monty and Red, who are, we're here to discuss this. Uh, we're here to discuss anti-fascism, what's going on in modern day, what we can see from the past, and how we go forward. So thank you guys for being here. If Red, you want to give your introduction first, and then Monty, and we'll get started.
Hi, yes, I'm Red. I prefer kind of they them pronouns. I'm a cadre with the American Party of Labor out of the Mid-Atlantic, and I'm very excited to be here and to go over this topic. It's very pressing, and I think that there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of very dangerous confusion or really nefarious cultural maneuvers of the ruling class to divide and confuse and to terrorize working people, to not resist the utter theft of what few liberties we have, what little democracy we enjoy, or what economic concessions we depend on for our survival. So, thank you, Felicity, for holding this together, and I'm really excited to get into the conversation.
Great. And I'm Monty. I'm an organizer in like the New York area, and I'm excited to have this conversation. One thing I wanted to like maybe piggyback off of is to say that like Antifa, right, as like
Mm.
the government is designating it, or the sort of like pseudonym of for just anyone who is anti-fascist, is not just not a centralized organization, but it's not an organization at all. It's an ideology, right? This bill or this like designation of not bill, but this designation of Antifa as a like a political extremist terrorist organization is not saying if you are a member of this or that organization that's just illegal, right? It's outlawing a thought, right? This is
Yeah.
them like making a thought crime. Uh, just as like fascism isn't one organization. American fascism, right? It's not one organization. There are like a, a lot, a scary amount of fascist organizations within the borders of the United States, right? But
Yeah.
and there are like our political parties are to various degrees fascist in like various ways, right? Uh, and like you know yeah, they're outlawing an idea. They're outlawing just an opposition to like state capital, like yeah, fascism.
Yeah, no, I specifically brought up the Unite the Right rally because the organizations that showed up to the Unite the Right rally are specifically fascist. And they while there is not necessarily a fascist party that's like specifically calls itself fascist in the United States, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And a lot of them have united under the banner of MAGA, Make America Great Again, which is like a very broad term. I think that like we should recognize that Make America Great Again, especially when I believe it was actually a Reagan slogan. Am I if I'm am I mis am I misinformed here? But I thought it may have been like a Reagan slogan. If I'm wrong, hmm?
Reagan did, in fact, use either that slogan exactly or the basics theme of that we have to go backwards. We have to drag ourselves back to the promised land to when everything was good, apparently. And Trump has, I think, in the past admitted a lot of admiration for Ronald Reagan and for his administration. So I believe you're correct.
Yeah, and that's why I would say that like especially Ronald Reagan and all of the harm that he was part of in response, well, especially with capitalist powers essentially being able to um, centralize a lot more power and doing a lot of tax cuts to the wealthy. It's not surprising at all that this has morphed into an extremely reactionary fascist party. And when it comes to like the Unite the Right rally, which is something I keep coming back to, um, these organizations have now made explicit contact with neo-Nazi organizations that seek to do Nazism in the United States. And it's very scary, honestly, and more people should be very upset about this terror or designation of Antifa, because this is the direct opposition to Nazism. And so to kind of get this conversation started off, I want to like, pose this question of, what what makes this terror designation, I mean, I kind of already talked about it, but what makes this terror designation um so specific for the times, but also so unique in your guys' perspective as Marxist-Leninists?
If I could address that real quick, I mean, I think the specific for the times, I think it hints and exposes that capitalism is in crisis. And unfortunately, it's not necessarily a crisis of proletarian revolution. It is, at this time, a crisis it is directly involved in, responsible for, and faced with itself upon. You could look at environmental collapse. We're approaching the last couple of years before the our carbon budget and global temperatures reach irreversible levels. There is escalating damage to environments and extinction of species around the globe. There are the threats of impending global conflict. Obviously, we can look at Ukraine or we can look at Israel and West Asia with Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran. My head's spinning. Of course, the feud over Taiwan between the PRC and the United States, or brinksmanship with the DPRK. The threat of war is prevalent, and these crises, along with health crises like capitalism's complete inability to respond effectively to COVID or the next oncoming economic recession, people don't talk about how the Great Recession of '08 was actually more damaging to the economy proportionately than the Great Depression of 1929.
Hmm.
So we are in a really committed spiral, and capitalism is destroying itself and it is destroying the future of humanity. And in order that it can carry on this task and enjoy the sunshine until that dusk for humanity that it is bringing about, it has to tighten its bootstraps and press it down firmer on the shoulders of working people so that there is no interruption of this process, no distraction from capital accumulation or winning the next global conflict or taking advantage of environmental crises or health crises to become even fatter and happier and wealthier. So it may come about that the proletarian revolution is just one more step of this deepening capitalist crisis that necessitates for the bourgeoisie the intensification of fascism and of the building of fascist power. But at this moment, we are kind of caught with our guard down, and we have to kind of snap out of the stupor of the boldness of the reactionary bourgeoisie, and we have to really commit ourselves to organization because one of the things that makes fascism of today so unique and singular is that the bourgeoisie have more power objectively than they've ever had before. People have been fired. People have been kicked out of school. People have been harassed and attacked because of comments they've made online or of
Mm.
criticisms they've made of the Trump regime. Or if we were to say, look at the assassination of Charlie Kirk. um, we are heading towards a subjective construction of fascism that is more objectively powerful than ever. I mean, just look at the record military budget. The United States military is the strongest, best funded, best organized military in the history of the planet. So uh, obviously, this is very intimidating. It is meant to intimidate us, but we can't let that paralyze us with fear. I think that, we have to really take solace in knowing that if they are criminalizing thought, as Monty said, they've really just exposed themselves. If they are opposed to Antifa, then who are they for?
That's a very good point.
So I think that these just have to motivate us going forward, and that we have to see that we're on the 11th hour. We have to commit ourselves more personally and collectively to organizing and to educating ourselves and others and to being more proactive because we may not have the opportunity to do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well,
Monty, did you want to comment? Sorry, did you want to comment on that?
oh yeah. I was gonna say, well said, comrade. You know, one thing that I'm thinking about where we're in this like particular moment in history, right, where basically the crux of this like of a lot of the issues of our world are coming around us as like a species, right? Having to wrestle with the conclusion that like yes, there must be a planned economy in order to like have a planned ecology for the survival of the human race, right? And I think the question, right, the political question is who who controls it and how much democracy will there be, right? And the capitalist world, right, wants to make sure that uh, the people who own the bulk of monopolies of private equity are in control of this economy, right? And this like is it's like morphing modern fascism like into what it is, right? Because historical fascism is kind of a really different thing than modern fascism, right? I don't think that we'll ever really get another Nazi party, right? Because like for a lot of different reasons, right? But like what we are going to get are like the ruling class had learned the lessons of the Second World War, right? That yes, they need to take like control of the state apparatus to like to plan to have their own kind of planned economy, right? But that by doing it like so overtly through like a one party thing, uh like creates the opposition necessary to like mobilize all of the disparate uh groups that like are fighting for democracy, those any of those that may be oppressed regardless of their like actual class analysis, right? That they want a piece of democracy, right? So like and that's how you get like all of the partisans of World War II, right? Like I think they were like extremely instrumental in winning the Second World War, uh you know, against the Nazis, is that like not only was there the USSR and then like Britain and the US and you know doing like actual like resistance to the fascists, but like that just normal people at home were like picking up guns and fighting against the occupation, right? And that's like the thing that they really, really, really want to stop from happening, right? Because you know, a country like the U.S. can be like revanchist and uh, like monopolist and like seek to control the whole world. And there may be these like governments that like they'll call a rogue state that they can designate a government as a terrorist state, and they're doing resistance to at least just U.S. hegemony, right? Um, Not even necessarily fighting for socialism, just their stake, right, that they're fighting against. But like those powers cannot win without the support of the people. And if you give them one big bad, one boogeyman, then those people will be mobilized, and that's what they're designating Antifa right now, right? Those like people that aren't exactly super political in their everyday life, but can be mobilized against an enemy to their specific interests.
Well, in response to that, real quick, I would just like to say that if we can draw some parallels of our political climate today, between the Democrats and the Republicans, I think people who are a little bit older, who have voted in multiple elections, have maybe gone down a path of learning and of class consciousness, have kind of recognized that the Democrats and the Republicans are two wings of one political party representing the capitalist class of the United States. And we see this kind of dynamic play out in different ways across different countries in different times. But if we were to look at Germany itself, for instance, we would see a liberal left, ostensibly left wing party, really tied to the bourgeoisie in so many different ways, really presenting a carrot to the working class. Whereas the more honest, open, reactionary wing of this bourgeois political party is the stick. Um, in the aftermath of the November Revolution in Germany in 1918, there was the Kapp Putsch, in which German military officers tried to overthrow the newly established Weimar Republic, and the Weimar Republic itself was seen as this like enlightened alternative to the Kaiser and to monarchism and Bismarckism. Um, and the Kapp Putsch failed because the working class was militantly organized. They had not forgotten the lessons of the November Revolution. And while the Freikorps, the fascist paramilitaries, were that stick, engaging in disappearances and in beatings and in arrests and summary public executions striking workers and of trade unionists and of communist militiamen, the Social Democratic Party was that carrot saying, like, oh, we will dismiss Cap and his co-conspirators. We will put through a number of labor reforms. We will establish a constitution for the Weimar Republic. And this kind of splitting effect, did it work? One, to entice and to distract and to, really comfort many working people, while the stick terrorized and intimidated other working people to a significant enough degree that the revolution in Germany could not continue at that time to a successful finish. And I really do think that in our conditions today, we have to recognize the Democrats as a carrot, a really moldy carrot, sure. I mean, what do they effectively offer working people,
Right.
But I was just I got a notification from social media about Gavin Newsom, and instead of
Oh.
talking about the Sumud flotilla being attacked by Israel yesterday, instead of talking about the disappearances and the separation of tens of thousands of families in the last 6 months alone, or the designation of anti-fascism as a terrorist organization, quote unquote, he wants to talk about prices raising 50% from Microsoft,
Oh my God.
Microsoft products. Of course, it helps that Microsoft lobbies the Democratic Party in California very heavily. And I really just love these priorities. Were the Social Democrats in the 1920s complaining about soaring prices for pictures of pinup girls? I mean, what really matters to working people? Is it our democratic expression and our prosperity and our ability to organize against tyranny and repression and war, or is it Xbox gaming passes going up? Like it's like the Democrats are digging their own graves, and
Mm-hmm.
I think to kind of challenge you, Monty, a little bit, I would say that uh, the bourgeoisie do not necessarily need to have one party if they have the specter of an opposition, if they have this pathetic excuse of a deterrent and of a competitor to the big boogeyman party. And I think that that has been expressed historically, and we're seeing it today.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was my point, right? Is that we won't see historical fascism in the same form, right? It's not going to put, because the ruling class in their vie for control over the world economy, right? Like this faction of the ruling class, at least, right? Or the one that's trying to take over, uh, is not going to put all of their eggs in one basket again. They have learned their lesson from the Second World War that if they like create a big boogeyman, the people will mobilize against it, right? So they have to like do their best to sort of spread out that that battle, right? And I think that it's primarily fought in like what like the U.S. military, or this man in particular that I posted in the chat, Lieutenant Colonel Michael A. Aquino,
Yeah.
had wrote a book called Mind War, in the I believe in the 70s. He wrote a book called Mind War, and like what the U.S. Army calls like psychological warfare, or what um, Edward Lansdale, a CIA or a military, an army intelligence guy that was in the Second World War and in the Philippines and in Indonesia, the guy who came up with the plan to trick communist guerrillas into thinking there was a vampire out in the jungles, right? Like this guy, we call it the battle for hearts and minds, right? And if we look at like the ability to this of the CIA to like coup governments abroad, right? What is the key factor in their success, right? And it's their ability to control the narrative, the ability to control like the public opinion, right? If they can do that, they can topple a regime and replace it with their own, right? But if they can't do that, then they fail.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really important when we look at like the way that specifically I also think it's important to look at how opposition to like direct opposition to the fascists have been treated, because this is I would really call like the trade unionists and the communists the canaries in the coal mine of like when fascism is is looming, because we can see how the Nazis did not go after the Jews necessarily first. I mean, that was the ultimate plan, was to exterminate the Jews and enslave the Slavs and then exterminate them as well. But they very strategically got rid of their direct opposition in Germany, which was the German communists and trade unionists, who were the real direct opposition, not the reformists. Of course, those guys were going to be killed as well, because the fascists they're bloodthirsty. They want to kill anyone and everyone that they can. That's at all opposing to their ideology, which is itself suicidal. But they first went after the communists and the trade unionists because those were the people that could very effectively actually mobilize against fascism. And Donald Trump also signed an executive order, I believe, designating those who are anti-capitalist and quote unquote anti-American. I'm not necessarily sure if he said it was as terrorists, but specifically calling that out as like a net negative, as like a groups that we need to be targeting as bad, which to the American population is like, those who support the MAGA movement, which is really not as many as people think it is. But those who are in support of MAGA ultimately see that as like, okay, so anyone who really says anything bad about Trump is like, a terrorist, essentially. Which I think the designation of terrorism is very strategic, because the United States has a very an interesting history with terrorism. We can see like 9/11 was like the catalyst for the Patriot Act, which allowed a lot more government surveillance on American people, and is what ultimately later caused people like Edward Snowden to defect and release damning evidence that the United States government was just surveilling regular people. But we can see how terrorism, or designating groups as terrorists, really gets the blood up of Americans without actually critically thinking about, is this actually a terrorist group, or is this designation being used to appeal to my emotions as a group that is supposedly a terrorist in nature, but actually isn't, because of our history with terrorism. I mean, Monty, you're from New York, so I'm sure that especially with Mamdani and everything, the Democrats have not at all shied away from using the terrorist designation for him. Especially more right-leaning Democrats. But that this comment I just made is really just building off of what you guys just said.
Yeah, I think that it's incredibly rich for the Trump administration, or the the government of any capitalist country. Of course, it's not just the United States, it's not just Europe, to condemn terrorism. When uh, capitalism, one of its major markets is terrorism, is state-sanctioned violence. What could we consider, but anything else, the extermination of tens of millions of indigenous Americans over a period of several centuries,
Right.
in northern and southern hemispheres. What could we designate as anything else but the deaths of 50,000 Palestinians in just the last 2 years alone? This goes back to 1947, where civilians have been displaced and starved and murdered by the Israeli state and its allies.
Yeah.
Um, and the millions that are currently facing severe existential famine. Uh, Capitalism, when it points a finger at you, it's pointing an even bigger one back at itself. I think that when it designates other people as terrorists, it is doing so with a complete lack of self-awareness. Um, and like obviously we could look to the examples left behind of fundamentalist Islamic jihadist terrorism um, as really a competitor, not necessarily some glorious resistance against American imperialism and its vassals, but really like a mobilization of forces competing for control over countries, over regions against American or in some cases European or Russian hegemony. And I think that we in the United States have kind of been conditioned in many ways to see to use that word as a stand-in for like the villain, the boogeyman, the big bad. And when we look at it soberly and scientifically, if terrorism is the use of violence to achieve political goals, then we cannot allow the United States government under Trump, under Biden, under Obama, under either of the Bushes or Clinton, or you go all the way back to George W. Bush destroying the Shawnee in Ohio. Uh, Violence has always been used by the United States government to achieve political goals. And as working class people, and very much an existential threat uh, over the environment, over global conflict, over the next COVID, over the next Great Recession, we are in a struggle for our very survival. But it's important noting, and this is what makes people genuinely revolutionary and genuinely anti-fascist, is that we are not always going to be able to use violence. Violence is not always going to be the necessary step. Violence, in many cases, should be the last thing that we prioritize, especially in the United States today, where there is like, and this is why I like the way you pointed out, Felicity, that there is no Antifa organization, there is no movement. There is the potential for a movement. There are 81 million Americans who voted against Trump, and they didn't just disappear overnight. There are tens of millions of people who took to the streets this summer against the Trump regime and a lot of the undemocratic maneuvers they're taking. We have the great potential for a really decisive anti-fascist movement in this country, and we can't lose sight of that. We can't be intimidated by the screeching of the Trump administration, calling their opposition terrorists when they're destroying nations in West Asia. Um, we really just, it's a matter of holding firm and doing the work, reaching people, of talking to people, listening to their concerns, platforming our viewpoints, and explaining the historical necessity of defeating fascism in North America and Western Europe today.
Yeah, I would like to piggyback off of uh, the question of violence, right? Because like we have been seeing this like uptick in political assassinations. Uh, a podcast that I really love called Parapower Mapping has kind of dubbed it the Imer Israeli Years of Lead. That we're kind of going through right now. And I think it's a very apt term. But historically, like when it comes to the question of violence, right? It's never a question of like of morality, right? It's like, is it
Right.
right or wrong to do violence, right? Uh, it's about, like I was saying before, this like mind war, battle for hearts and minds. Who controls the narrative, right? Because in the colonial era, people fighting for their national liberation were deemed terrorists by the Western media, right? But if they were able to control the narrative in their home country where they were organizing their people, then they were liberation fighters, right? They were heroes for like the national their national project, right? If you look at anything, right, it's always about like, do you have the ability to harness the social potential for mobilization or for organization uh, in a situation where there comes the question of violence, right? Because it doesn't matter who does the violence; it's who controls the way that people react to it.
Mm.
That is able to seize power, right? So like
Yeah.
we shouldn't be like at the point right now where we cannot control the narrative against the fascist movement in America, right? We should be against all kinds of violence because any kind of violence, whether we do it or they do it, they're controlling the way that people react to it. And what we need to be doing is building up our ability to project our viewpoint and show its correctness and get it in front of as many people as possible. Because until then, any bullet fired will be fired in the service of fascism.
Yeah, I mean, something that I think about is the complete sanitization of Nelson Mandela and like what he fought for. Because like even my own mom, who is, I would say, more progressive than she is like not. She definitely holds like some reactionary opinions, but overall she's quite progressive. But even she, tried to make the argument to be that Nelson Mandela was not violent. And I'm like, first of all, that's just not true. That's just not true. But also, when you see the narrative of like armed resistance against South African apartheid, oftentimes that like we look at that now and say like they were objectively correct, you know. But at the time, the narrative that was going around is that like these are savage barbarians, like they don't like the European way of life, they don't like that. That's always kind of been the narrative about indigenous people and black and brown folks and people of color in general who are in armed resistance against their oppressors. The narrative from imperialist powers and European powers more specifically is that they want to destroy quote unquote our way of life. um, and this idea that like the violence that was being done um, from the um, from what's it called, the those who were fighting against South African apartheid, was specifically fighting against oppression. But and we look at, like I said, we look at that now and say like, oh, this is a good thing. But at the time, once again, it was seen as like wrong. Because the narrative coming from mainstream media, and Red and I talked about this on the manufacturing consent episode, where like those media, like the media serves specifically bourgeois interests who want to see who want the large majority of the proletariat and the working class to see that kind of violence as inherently a bad thing. That if you take up arms against us, you are just like them, the boogeyman. Uh, so I just wanted to bring that up, that specific contextualization up, because I think it's very pertinent to the ways in which liberal-minded people kind of see violence, and very much like to sanitize those who did it at one point for liberation.
Right. I
And
mean,
it's like,
you can. Sorry. Uh,
like I was just go ahead,
go,
Monty. That's fine.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, you can like see in like news clips like all over the 20th century of like any organization that uh was fighting for its own interests were like qualified as against the American way of life or
Yeah.
against the Western way of life, right? Or like quotes from like George Bush, I will never apologize for the United States. I don't care what the facts are. I'm not an apologize for America kind of guy. Like, like
I don't care
whatever
what the facts
is
are.
in the, exactly whatever is in the interest of uh, the clique that controls the American uh, government, right? Is what's right, and anything against that is morally reprehensible, uh, not to mention just wrong and savage, right?
Yeah, no, it's very much seeing like it's the narratives that were coming from like the settlers who were essentially genociding the native people of the United States, of North America. Like they're savage, they don't know, they don't like our way of life. Like there's this something I kind of think about is like the way like who grew up watching Disney? Anybody? Anybody
Yeah,
else grew up
I saw
watching Disney?
I saw a good amount of it.
Like Pixar mostly myself, but
Uh,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up watching Disney princess movies because I'm assigned female at birth, and one movie that I watched a lot was Pocahontas, and you can see how much like there's a specific scene where there's like both sides are taking up arms, like you see the native people, the indigenous people taking up arms, and then you see the white settlers taking up arms, but they're both singing the same song called Savages. You know, they're like savages, savages. Um, but like that narrative is not true. You know, like the native people were fighting for their right to exist. The settler colonialists were fighting to murder all of them, and or like what they did to Pocahontas specifically, take them and basically create like wash them of all of their cultural heritage, of all of the things that made them like that they were part of in their native homeland, and basically Europeanize them. I don't know what else other word to use, but like that use of like basically saying, oh, it was both sides. Both sides were doing bad things. Both sides saw the others as savages. No, that is completely wrong. That narrative is essentially saying, well, it's like a centrists now who try to say, well, both sides are bad. It's like no, like the far right, you know, got us the Third Reich. The far left got us the weekend. Like these are not the same thing. And this is not necessarily to say that indigenous people are in ostensibly far left, but it is to say that like the narrative that like Disney and other giant multimedia corporations are trying to push through movies like Pocahontas, saying that like, oh, well, they were just as bad, is wrong and is doing much more harm than good. And when I think about the anti-fascist narrative going on right now, you know, the centrists, as I said before, want to see it as like, well, both sides, like kind of like horseshoe theory, like both sides are trying to do violence, both sides are like, you know, like they're you know, they're just as bad as the other. And it's like, again, the right-wing fascists got us the Third Reich. The left-wing anti-fascists and like trade unionists and communists got us the weekend. You know, we cannot ascribe one way of being to two very separate political movements.
But
Right.
something I'd like to,
Yeah, go ahead, Red.
well, I was just gonna say, like, you know, Monty addressed earlier this idea of, you know, who controls the narrative, who, and I would like to, like, whose violence is it? You know, cui bono, and you know, like at the end of the day, the very same people who are forming these political parties, who are lobbying and funding and running for office in the U.S. Congress or in a nondescript European Parliament, are of the same ruling class. And fascism is not this like this third way. It's not like this divorce, like lower, like higher reality than capitalism. It is the degradation of capitalism. It is final, like decayed form. It's really
Yes,
what capitalism must kind of resort to if it's going to survive.
and maintain
And you know,
hegemony.
exactly. A hegemony either over its own working masses or against other capitalist states. And you know, like if you were to go back and if you looked at some of the first examples of fascism in Europe, you would see people, um, you know, like in the case of Italy, for example, with the rise of fascism there. Uh, the late like the trade union leaders and like the big industrialists, they weren't, you know, funding, they weren't praising, they weren't like platforming the anti-fascist militias. They were funding and opening the door for Mussolini's March on Rome. They lobbied the king to install him as prime minister because they knew they would benefit from a fascist regime. They recognized fascism as their political vanguard to tighten their boots against their competitors in, say, Turkey or against France, and initially against not against Germany, and also to break down the incredibly active working class movement. People don't consider and don't know just how militant the Italian working class were. And I'm not necessarily saying militancy is some kind of, qualifier, but the Italian proletariat had about 2 years. It was called the Red Biennium, the Red 2 years, in which there were factory occupations and barricades and general strikes, and people were really like disgusted with the conditions of recession, of the consequences of the First World War. And because people were so aggravated with the conditions of poverty and inequality and the horrific losses of World War One, fascism was the response to shut up those workers, get them back to their jobs, continue churning out profits, and never to form a union, never to form their own political party. And to this idea of who controls the narrative, with the so-called dissolution of the fascist regime in Spain in 1979, there was the so-called Pact of Forgetting, a mutual amnesty for all, by all. It was like this whitewashing of like, oh yeah, like we're not going to prosecute fascists, we're not going to demonize or, ostracize anti-fascists, although many anti-fascist revolutionaries were still held in prison for years after the
They
dissolution of
did
the
the
Franco
same thing during
regime.
the years of lead. They did the same thing during the years of lead in Italy.
Right. Exactly. It's just this idea of, fascism sanitizing its own history. It's like it really is like a weapon that capitalism will bring out, and once they're done with their battle, they'll put it back and they'll wash their hands of the murder they committed. Uh, Fascism, it committed the violence it really needed to in Italy, in Spain, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Chile. And now that it's terrorized and divided and it's beaten down the proletariat and the laboring masses of their countries, they put the weapon away and they've washed their hands of it, but nothing is stopping them from bringing it out again. And while fascism is a weapon that the bourgeoisie will resort to in crisis, only the elimination of the bourgeoisie as a class and of their system will remove the threat of fascism forever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about like fascism, as you just said. I really think that that's a good point, like a really important point to be making, that fascism is a weapon of the bourgeoisie to maintain power over the working class and over the proletariat. It's like I said, it's no surprise that the first thing that the fascists go after, the first folks that the fascists go after, are leftists, are people who are direct opposition, because these are the people that can organize very effectively against this. The Third Reich in Germany, war was already happening with Russia many years before a lot of American historians like to say it happened. Russia was already, the Red Army was already having to battle against fascism because the fascists wanted to see the communist Soviet Union fall first. And there was, it did not obviously come to pass, but many liberal powers were more, at one point, were more willing to align themselves with fascist Germany than they were willing to ever align themselves with the communists. It wasn't until specifically, obviously, like 1941, December 7th, for the Americans, that they, declared war on Japan, blah, blah, blah. But there were plenty of American capitalists who were perfectly fine with funding and sending, weapons and tanks and ammunitions to fascist Germany, Henry Ford being a huge one. He was a huge anti-Semite.
Yeah.
And he was
One
an incredibly rich capitalist as well. So I think that's might have been something that he, as a yeah, as a class conscious capitalist, would have maybe desired in the United States, or as protected as a model in case things escalated in the class war in the United States, perhaps. Uh, but I cut you off. What were you saying, Monty?
I was gonna say that one thing that you had mentioned that the liberal powers of the Western world were like basically supporting fascist movements if they were going to attack the Soviet Union, right?
Hmm.
I read a lot on like military intelligence history and stuff like that, or like history of intelligence agencies and stuff like that. And I'm reading this book on called The Red Orchestra, which is about a Soviet intelligence ring of like partisans that like helped gather intelligence for the Soviet Union uh, in like France and Germany. Um, and one thing is like the writer of this book like is talking about some of the background, and he's talking about like Stalin being paranoid, like basically like saying that the non-aggression pact with Germany was like Stalin being paranoid that he was going to be attacked by Great Britain, or the Soviet Union was going to be attacked by Great Britain before the Germans. So like having this truce with Nazi Germany, even though they knew that Nazi Germany was going to invade them, was like a way for them to get the industrial equipment and arms and tools and stuff so that they could defend against Britain, right? And the writer of this book like frames it as Stalin being like incredibly paranoid and this like great grave error that he made, right? But and then goes on in the following pages to like say, and according to like British military higher ups, they were like mapping out the region of like Afghanistan, like and Central Asia, so that they could find a route to get in and bomb the Baku oil fields. Right? Like they
Well,
were actively planning to do it, but Stalin was apparently crazy for thinking that they were going to.
yeah, there's so much evidence to prove that they were definitely going to, and it was like obviously it never came to pass, but like the liberal, like I think this is a very true statement. You scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds. Like they are 100% more likely to side with the fascists, unless, of course, there are other external factors like what happened in World War II. Like there are like liberals and reformists will always side with the fascists before they will ever side with the communists and the revolutionaries because they want to maintain a sort of comfortable order which doesn't like actually hold them accountable to the ways in which they have capitulated. And I think of directly the Democratic Party. As Red mentioned earlier, I believe it was Red that mentioned earlier in this conversation, the Democrats are not opposition to fascism. They are very much aiding and abetting the fascist party, which is the Republican Party of the United States. Because, like, I mean, currently, this as time of filming, this is October 2nd. There is a government shutdown happening right now. And I fully expect, and I could be wrong, I'm very willing to be wrong, that the Democrats will blink first because they actually have no backbone. This is like the first time that they have actually done anything of remote they have actually done any real work to oppose the fascists. The Democrats have been very willing to just kind of go along with whatever the fascist party is doing and say, well, I don't approve of this. I don't like it, but well, it's fine, I guess. Like they're not actually going to do fascism. They're not actually going to just go and like exterminate a bunch of people. And it's like, no, they definitely do want to do that. Like the Democrats have I like a lot of people are saying, well, they're burying their head in the sand. No, they know exactly what they're doing. Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Cory Booker, when you see them in pictures with Netanyahu, they know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly who they're aligning themselves with, and they don't care. They do not care because they are paid by the same moneyed interests that the Republicans are paid by. This is not uncommon, and it's extremely important to recognize that these are not Antifa's strongest fighters. These people are not in fact Antifa at all because they are willing to fully align themselves with Netanyahu. who is modern day, like the 21st century Hitler. He wants to exterminate every single Palestinian out of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And the fact that they cannot see that and be opposed to it in any way. I mean, I would even throw Bernie Sanders under the bus here as well. He was not willing to call it a genocide for 2 years. That is not anti-fascism. That is aiding and abetting the fascists who are currently exterminating thousands of people. Like this is I really like to challenge liberals who want to say that we just need to vote harder and like support the Democrats more because they are our only hope, quote unquote. And it's like, no, they are very much part of the same. They are very much part of the problem, and it's two sides of the same coin essentially. And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
There is like a this like term now that like fits it perfectly. It's like liberal Zionist. It's like saying like liberal fascist, like a
Yeah,
progressive fascist actually.
they're
You
just
know?
fascists. Like
You know?
Cory Booker
I,
saying a whole lot of fucking nothing when he was up there for 25 hours on the Senate floor, like saying a whole lot of fucking nothing. There is nothing that I can remember from that whole 25 hours that he stood up there talking that really stuck with me. As like, oh wow, this guy is really like doing his best to oppose the Republicans because he wasn't filibustering anything. He was just standing up there to talk. And then you know what he did? He went and voted to send more arms to Israel. That's extremely performative. There is nothing about that that is opposing fascism.
the society
Yeah,
of the spectacle. That's all I have to say.
well, yeah, like I completely agree, and I think that like these are conversations that I've had with a lot of people. A lot of like radical liberals would call themselves like abolitionists or whatever, and I remember that what I would often say is that Biden's victory in 2000 was not a victory for the Democrats, but it was the masses' defeat of Donald Trump. I do think that if Trump were not like if he and the movement that he has built up within the Republican Party as a vessel did not exist, it would not have been such a historic election. It would not have brought out as many people because Americans, you know, we don't really have anything invested in these elections. And case in point, when Biden won, did he eliminate student debt? Did he, uh, you know, create a public option for healthcare? Did he raise the minimum wage? Did he even do $2,000 COVID relief stimulus checks? No, 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 and no. Because the Democrats are not a party of the people. They are a moderate wing of the bourgeois political party, of its vanguard politically. And I think that that's just one of the many reasons why Harris in 2024 lost that election. As I said earlier, the 81 million people that voted against Trump, not for Biden, but against Trump in 2020, they didn't just disappear. They realized, many of them did, that they weren't going to attach their names to a sinking ship, to a party that in many ways was acting against their interests by supporting Zionism, by aping on the war in Ukraine instead of using economic and diplomatic weight to find a peaceful conclusion to the war there. Um, the just the inevitable failure to tackle inflation and to address the rights of the working class and to bolster education in this country to respond adequately to the environment's collapse and to health crises like COVID. People are realizing that the Democrats are no real option. But the problem in America is that for too long we have believed the lie that there is no history in this country of the masses struggling independently to achieve their political aims. I keep drawing a lot of allusions to anti-fascism of the past, and we can bring those back home to the United States. We could talk about the Red Week in 1919, in which the Ku Klux Klan was mobilized to attack anti-war demonstrators and sharecroppers unions and workers unions or branches of the Communist Party of the USA all over the South. We could talk about the Ku Klux Klan um, threatening members of the Communist Party who were supporting civil rights activists in the 1930s. And we could talk about the coal wars of Appalachian coal miners against the National Guard and state and local police, or the crowd of black women who marched into Mobile, Alabama in 1932 to free their husbands and sons who were arrested by the cops and the Klan. Um, and uh, like that is the history of working people there. And I always like to point this out that Stalin actually threatened to send in military support into Mobile if the White House didn't respond to that crisis. And of course,
Haha.
FDR did.
Of course he
But I
did.
always like to bring that up. But like that's the legacy here. The legacy here is not the eloquent and well like understated pacifism of MLK, who was far more radical than liberals are willing to admit. And it wasn't the flower child, free love, hippie peace movement of the 70s. America has a very proud anti-war, anti-fascist, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial tradition in this country, but it has forgotten itself. And this is the very reason why we're seeing these very arbitrary declarations from the White House declaring Antifa a terrorist organization, or rewriting the history of, say, Columbus, or of indigenous people, or of slavery. The Trump administration is trying to coddle the American public. It's trying to neutralize our consciousness as a people for how successful we have been in the class struggle, and we cannot permit that. And like education will remain a very important tool for a developing revolutionary and anti-fascist movement in this country, because if we're going to have guidance, if we're going to have inspiration, we have to know what's happened, and we can't believe the lies and the obfuscations of the capitalists, because that can only benefit them. In the same way as the Pact of Forgetting in Spain has kind of created this, rose-tinted apathy for politics. Fascism exists, the class struggle exists, and it's not going away until it's won. And what does victory in the class struggle look like for capitalism? It looks like fascism, ecological collapse, endless war, and the extinction of life on this planet. But the victory of socialism, of the working people in the class struggle, means the elimination of private property, the elimination of inequality, of poverty, of balanced development, of the elimination of unemployment and hunger, and of preventable disease. That is what we have to keep in mind, and we have to, see the destination of the continued horror of capitalism and fascism, or the future that we can win under socialism and anti-fascism.
Well said, comrade. You know,
Yeah,
something
very well
I think
said.
about is I think it's not totally true, but it's a useful abstraction about, like, when we're talking about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, uh, as like, oh, there's liberals and then there's these fascists, but like really what we are seeing, or it seems to be, is that the Democrats play like defense while the Republicans play offense for like the same, if not just like similar uh interests, right? One way I like to think about it too is that like there isn't like one ruling, like one group, and they all have the same interests, and that's the ruling class, right? There's like tons of these factions, and there's like criminal elements that are always trying to break in, right? And we'll see like what I think the Democrats, or a lot of Democrats, really represent are this like older Atlanticist money, like the families that have controlled the economy of America, especially in the Northeast, for centuries now. And then you have like these like upstarts that back in the day it was like going out west to Texas and California to make money, but that same interest group, right? These people who like want to become the ruling elite, right, in this system, right, are the ones that like are most gung-ho about like war in Asia and things like that. Um, like cowboys, if you will, right? Like the Reagan types,
Yeah.
right? And that's what we're seeing. What we're seeing today is that like there was like this there's a writer named Oglesby who wrote a book called the Yankee Cowboy War, where he's like basically talking about the JFK assassination, but is like framing it as like this coup by the cowboy clique in the American establishment to take power from this like Atlanticist, uh, like like Boston Brahmin elite that had been like controlling the country for most of its existence, right? Um, but like that then kind of coalesced where like yes, that cowboy faction won out, the Reagan faction won out. Every president since Reagan has been, you know, basically in line with his vision for America, and then like the breakaway is then to go like further right, you know, like
Right.
and today it's like not the quite the same. It is still like those old American like elite family interests, right? Still have like a foothold. And
Mm.
what I think is that their goal is basically the same as these like what I would call like tech cowboys or like tech elites, the like PayPal mafia, South African new apartheid like tech apartheid clique or whatever, right? That are like vying for power by like backing people like Trump and JD Vance, you know, the Peter Thiels
Yeah.
um, of the world, right? What they want is to like seize for themselves the like infrastructure of America. If that means like breaking it up and selling it off so that they with the most money can buy it up and have it, right? I think that's why the right wing is so much for like destabilizing everything. The more chaos there is, the more that they can like just grab up the infrastructure of the state and like for themselves, right? Whereas like the old money, they want to have this like massive surveillance state and like use technology to control the population and all this stuff, but they want to integrate it in a way that's safe for their interests, right? That's why like if you look at the deals that like Kamala Harris and Biden were willing to make with the like tech elite tech establishment, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and those people, they like were totally into what they're selling, right? They're just trying to like insert it into the existing power structure without destabilizing any of it, right? And then but like the right wing, right, are basically under their control now, and they're like trying to destabilize it so they can take as much of it as they can as quickly as they can.
Yeah, it's really a big power grab right now. Like something I think about is like Palantir and like the fact that like a lot of like the surveillance state has just been outsourced to private like interests and everything and moneyed interests. And it's like it's not necessarily being done by the state, it's being done by private corporations like Peter Thiel's Palantir, who specifically want to like do surveillance on American people and regular ass people, but just under the guise of it being quote unquote private, when in fact they are just in collusion with the fascist party. Like, and I don't know. I think that when I think about the like this broad order to say Antifa is terrorist, it's essentially and Trump has already done this, but declaring war on anyone who dares to um question, basically just question whether what they are doing is right or is like actually helping the American people, because Trump and his regime are historically not very popular. Like they are not popular at all. And so doing things like this, and very inflammatory things, I guess, because I mean, something I heard a lot during like the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests and everything, the counter protests specifically, and during January 6th was like calls against Antifa and saying that it was Antifa that was doing all of these things. And as a 16-year-old at the time, watching 16, 17-year-old, watching the BLM protests and also watching January 6th, I didn't really know what Antifa was at the time. And it was just a lot of confusion because I'm like, what is this group, that they're talking about? I just truly had no idea. And then I looked it up and I was like, why are they like opposing this? This is a good thing. Like being an anti-fascist is a good thing because the fascists were Hitler. So like why is this like to anyone who has like half a brain who can just like, look at the basic facts, it's like what exactly is the point of this?
Right. And this is an equivocation, like what we've seen from Trump is like historically has been like this weird equivocation of fascism and anti-fascism, talking about good and bad on both sides of, calling anti-fascists bad, but allowing that there are good people among fascists. And
Yeah.
you don't have to to hear him say that, but to look at the crowd he was speaking to right before he agitated them to storm the Capitol on January 6th a few years later. You know, uh, you know, like Trump, I don't think has very consciously considered himself or his movement fascist, but it is the kind of historical role that he has to really represent if he's going to try to neutralize the class struggle and play offensive on behalf of the bourgeoisie, or a pretty distinct faction of it at the very least. Um, and kind of, hammer through the elimination of many material, economic, and political concessions for laboring people under the guise of nationalism and of, a better deal for America, of making America great again. I think that's one of the benefits of the rise of fascism in the USA today is that it can be very covert. The United States has a very long history of being an incredibly reactionary, having incredibly reactionary governments.
Yeah.
So I think as working class people, we're in many ways desensitized to the things that our government does. Uh, and I think we're on the other hand, very disillusioned with a lot of the promises and the false hope offered by the Democrats. And this is why I think it's incredibly important that we really come to understand the radical working class history of our country, and of the anti-fascist movement generally. Like we should be inspired by the fact that the people of Palestine are still hanging on and still surviving today. We should be inspired that just a little over 100 years ago, just a bunch of factory workers in Parma, Italy, completely outnumbered, some of them veterans of World War I, rebuffed a column of fascist black shirts out of Parma, Italy. And we should be inspired that the working class of the United States was one of those forces that kind of pushed the United States to play a more active role against the Axis. Working people have power, and I think it's that kind of power that fascism exists to destroy. They want to eliminate the potential for the real opposition. It's not just about preventing the victory of socialism. It's about ensuring that they don't have to give anything. They don't have to promise free and fair elections. They don't have to promise freedom of speech or the right to unionize or a minimum wage or the 8-hour working day. I think that, anti-fascism should not just be about defense, but it should be about achieving that final victory against the forces that make fascism a possibility and depend on it.
Um, One thing I'd like to ask, I think, we're probably over an hour into this conversation, but what might be a good idea is to actually like define fascism. Uh,
Yeah.
and then we can talk about like what. So if we know exactly what fascism is, then we can then define like to ourselves what is anti-fascism, and then like if we are anti-fascist, which we are, right? How can we be most effectively anti-fascist, right? Because the American um, sort of view on politics or like or the popular thought in the American anti-fascist movement is, I think, mostly anarchist,
Yeah.
uh, and it's stopping us from being able to organize effectively. But Red, do you think you could define fascism? I think you're very eloquent about some of these
Yeah,
things.
definitely.
Sorry, I was muted. Well, I think that's a great point that you raised, Monty, and I don't think that um, I necessarily have to explain it. I think that we could actually turn to the root of the problem itself with Mussolini, who in his work, The Doctrine of Fascism, described that fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power.
Mm.
And it's basically this idea of the biggest monopoly corporations that are organized by the bourgeoisie really connecting, melding directly with the state power that is intensified to its utmost. The biggest police, the biggest surveillance state, the biggest military, the highest degree of censorship, as many prisons as possible, as practically possible, you name it. Um, and this in itself, in many ways, is a racket. The military-industrial complex obviously benefits from this. You would have real estate developers benefiting from the construction of all these military bases and prisons and so on. And if we kind of read between the lines here, uh, and we also kind of, I'm paraphrasing a Bulgarian communist who was a pretty influential organizer in the Comintern in the 1930s, uh, basically to say that fascism is the most open expression of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. It represents the wealthiest of the bourgeoisie. It represents their most organized, their most experienced in the class struggle and in the accumulation of profit, those who have the most to gain and the most to lose. And especially in the event of a proletarian revolution or episodes of the class struggle. Now, like what are the practical conclusions of this? Tyranny, censorship, oligarchy, the elimination of any semblance of democracy, any semblance of peace, any concessions for working people, that's all gone. Anything to enrich the bourgeoisie, anything that could stand in the way of their profit accumulation, it is going to be absolutely laid low by this ultra powerful state that they have absolute control over. I think it is in some respects, because Monty was very correct in pointing it out, that there are divisions within the bourgeoisie, and fascism kind of paves over those divisions. It kind of, creates a unified core of the capitalist class. And even other capitalists could be a potential opposition to the accumulation of super profits
Mm.
for those in major corporations. So it's more than just, hey, no concessions, no civil liberties, no democracy, no peace, no justice. It's this idea of like we don't even get the good things about the lower, like the early stages of capitalism. We don't get any social mobility, any innovation, any like you could say there are good things about capitalism, but if fascism is the utter decay of capitalism, there's no beating heart to it. It can only consume. And this is really what is in stock for working people in this reality is to produce and to be consumed for labor, for military use, for test subjects, as pawns in civil administration or in the police, you name it. And like if we are anti-fascists, then we have to be opposed to oligarchy, to censorship, to war, to tyranny. And I think this is why a lot of Americans, kind of in their knee-jerk way, assume anarchism to be that natural response, that natural anti-fascist solution, when in fact it is not. Because anarchism, unfortunately, can be very impotent. It can lack the basic organizational principles that are necessary to practically waging the anti-fascist struggle. And that assumption becomes very easy for people who have been conditioned to rejecting all hierarchy. Hierarchy in itself is not an ill, and it's very important if we're going to organize the successful anti-fascist struggle and a socially emancipation, social emancipation of the vast majority of society, to break the conditioning that exists around socialism, its ideological foundation, its practical history, and the potential that it can bring to the laboring people of the world in the 21st century.
Very well put, Red. I think that was very. I couldn't have said it any better myself. Honestly, I that was so eloquent.
Thank you,
Well,
Red.
no, I thank you both too, because like this is that kind of dynamic that happens. A lot of questions are being raised, and I think that the three of us as organizers or as people who've studied history or political science for many years now, we're kind of deep into our 20s or into our early 30s. These are things that we're all familiar with, but the crucial thing is that as many people as possible understand them, and this is the important fruit of this conversation that we should hope to have.
I'd also.
There is
Oh,
like,
go ahead, Monty. Sorry.
sorry. There's like one thing I wanted to like push on a little is that you know, while I agree that fascism is basically corporatism and the most open form of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, I think by saying that it's like the corporate control, like I think that there are other like extraneous like elements that make up fascism like specifically, right? Because if we were to say that it is like corporate control of the bourgeois state, or the merger of corporatism and the state, then today that's the dominant form of political organization in the world today. I can't think of very many countries in the world that aren't really just like a handful of Western corporations in a trench coat, you know. Like Canada is like three mining operations in a trench coat. So like, uh, is Canada fascist, right? And like most people would say no, they have like healthcare and stuff like that. And some people will be like, yes, they like are brutally oppressing the indigenous populations, right? Which I agree. But like, I think fascism has these other elements, right? Like revanchism, right? Like this, like this uh, overt desire to expand, right? There's a quote from Jay Gould where he's saying like, "Oh, I can hire one half of the working class to murder the other half," right? This mobilization of backwards and reactionary workers against progressive democratic workers, right? Um,
Well,
I think
if I could
that's an
respond to
important
something there,
element.
Monty.
Yeah.
I agree that that corporate foundation bleeds through to the bread and butter of capitalism today. But I think all that really says to me is that the material foundations are there for any state to devolve into fascism if it becomes necessary, to eliminate any of those concessions like Canada's free healthcare or like Social Security here in the United States or the NHS in Britain, if the crisis becomes too unbearable, if the threat of revolution draws too near. Like you could not have socialism without a working class. In the same way as you could not, I believe, have fascism without a major degree of corporate development and corporate power. But I think that real significance for fascism, and there's really no like boundary line. There is no threshold to be crossed. It's very, I think, in some respects, vague. But I think that it is clear that any state could devolve into that highest development of state power, that most open and ruthless expression of dictatorship over the of the bourgeoisie over the laboring classes. I think that that potential is there and is more readily apparent today than perhaps it was even, excuse me, in the 20th century. And I think that that is the real danger, and where it becomes important for us to recognize this incredibly eclectic, wealthy, oligarchic, combination of the ruling class that can kind of turn on the switch to fascism if they have to, if they feel they have to survive and to
Yeah,
maximize the super profits.
I would even say that like corporate handling of the state is kind of like the bud of this like flower that blooms into fascism, right? If I would be so pretentious as to quote a man, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Um,
No, you can't do that. Not here.
the bud disappears when the blossom breaks through. And we might say that the former is refuted by the latter. In the same way, when the fruit comes, the blossom may be explained to be a false form of the plant's existence. For the fruit appears as its true nature in. Oh, sorry. This is not the full quote. Let me get the full thing. Um,
I do like the point that you're making, though.
yeah. By the fruit appears as its true nature in place of the blossom. The ceaseless activity of their own inherent nature makes these stages moments of an organic unity where they not merely do not contradict one another, but where one is as necessary as the other and constitutes thereby the life of the whole, right?
Wow.
Which I think that this quote is like very much in the spirit of Marx and
Of
something
course.
like a nugget of like what Marx is like really holding on to when he's talking about when he in his book Capital, right?
Hmm.
Um, but like we can like project this onto any kind of social movement, right? And that like uh, maybe I was wrong at first that like this corporate control of the state, it's not the bud, it's actually the flower and fascism is its uh like decaying roots, right? Like this it like dying and withering away. Uh
Hmm.
before like trying to bloom again, right? Because sunflowers are perennial, and I think that capitalism is kind of like that. Like it goes into crisis, like gets becomes very weak, struggles to like regain control, right? These violent periods happen, and then it like restabilizes and grows and blooms, and then repeats the same cycle.
Very much so. And like kind of to take it back to the initial point that I was making about the slogan, Make America Great Again. It's kind of I think the major question surrounding that slogan and like the larger movement is make America great again for who exactly? And what period and are we trying to return to, quote unquote, that made America so great? And I think that what the slogan is trying to hide very poorly, in my opinion, to anyone who is even remotely a little bit left, is that it wants to go back to a period in which, for example, the overt racism and segregation of that capitalism, these tools that capitalism utilizes, can be openly used again. Um, and this idea of like, well, we just need to go back to our roots, or we need to go back to what made us so great. And it's like, again, great for who? And with this new fascist movement that has arisen, it has just arisen, like you were talking about, Monty, from the old. which is corporate power, of course, but also the ability to be able to, this whole war on woke thing, the ability to be able to openly say the N word as a white person and not get reprimanded at your place of work. Like being able to, put on a white hood and march around and you with your little buddies and everything, and lynch black people. Because that is it was a very violent manifestation of what reactionary uh, people wanted to do to folks that they saw as quote unquote the enemy, which was being actively backed up by capital. And so when I talk about that slogan and the use of it in the Reagan years and now in the Trump years, it is very perennial, like you were talking about, Monty, in which they want to quote unquote go back to what it was, which is currently just what America is, which is very reactionary,
Well,
if
I'd
that
like
makes
to
sense.
bounce something off of that. Um, Monty pointed out something earlier about, fascism kind of utilizing like revanchism or nationalism as like this false unity of the people, like this disarmament of the class struggle, like pasting over it. Like it doesn't exist, doesn't have to exist. It's a, Marxist contagion. It's like an intrusion in our idyllic little alpine life.
Mm,
Well, we know that's not true, and I think that is, that has some connections to this MAGA spirit that exists for American fascism. It's this desire to fan the flames of white supremacy, of segregation, of, the defense of free speech and the war on woke and winning the war against cultural Marxism. In reality, it's waging all the wrong battles. It's tilting at windmills. It's fireworks in the sky to distract us from the trenches the bourgeoisie are building for their artillery. Uh, no one really cares about the cultural Marxism or the war on woke. Woke doesn't have any meaning.
not
But it's
anymore.
a exactly it's a conversation that the bourgeoisie have to have. It's an idyllic life that never existed that the bourgeoisie have to say that they strive for so that they can disarm the revolutionary spirit that exists within all working class people in a very diverse country like the United States, and to divide working class people so that we're too busy arguing about who can say what,
Yeah,
who is free to do what, instead of realizing that the only people setting the table for this conversation are the same people who don't want us to talk about who but benefits from imperialist war or the destruction of Palestine, who benefits from the war on drugs or the prison industrial complex, or who benefits from the collapse of the environment. It's the very same capitalist class that is responsible for that is responsible for painting this wonderful picture in the land of Oz that we could all just magically go to if we voted for the right person enough times, so that we, don't get off our asses, don't get out into the streets, don't organize collectively to, achieve a real Oz, a red Oz of a land that has existed, just not in the United States, and it existed in a little place called the Soviet Union. And that's why
period.
it is also important to demonize the Soviet Union, demonize existing socialism, and to, categorize anything that is remotely progressive as communist, as socialist, as something un-American, because the bourgeoisie and their little middle class minions want you to believe that class struggle is foreign to the United States, but class struggle in many ways has built the United States.
I think that's a very eloquent way to put what I was trying to say about the slogan of Make America Great Again, that, you really hit the nail on the head with that one, Red.
Yeah, and one thing with like, all these people that want to go back, right? And it's always like, okay, go back to what? This idea, they have this like ideal of the 50s that like doesn't have any of the cool shit about the 50s. Like, uh, like the 50s is like a really interesting time period for America because it's like, you know, a time period where like women are in mass in the workforce. There's like the American people are like like seeing like movies and TV with sound and stuff we there's like this burgeoning art scene that is like in the wake of like a child of a country getting used to walking on the world stage, right? Like the awkward teenager going like taking his role on a throne or whatever, right? Like
Right.
it's
Yeah.
very like not just like this right wing image of like the white picket fence and the wife who doesn't talk back and and black people being like consigned to like a different space in society, right? uh it was actually like a period of like um sort of like the cult what is American culture like coming into being, and it could have
Yeah.
gone like in a lot of different directions.
Yeah, and even then, we can, we know that it wasn't some, homogenous thing, like that picket fence dream that was like the ideal of like the petty bourgeoisie and the landlords and the labor aristocracy, the middle classes of America to have. But we also know that there was like beatnik culture, that there was like, that there was a great deal of counterculture with jazz and with rock and roll and a lot of the kind of traces of mass unemployment and mass homelessness during the Great Depression in the 1930s that kind of yeah, championed the little man, that had a very strong anti-fascist bend to music, really informed by the participation of many American GIs of all races in the Second World War. We saw many American veterans coming back from more culturally progressive countries like France and the Netherlands being a little more expressive about being homosexual or being transgender and kind of exploring that.
Yeah.
American culture has always been more diverse than this picket fence dream that in itself has never really existed and in many ways could not have existed without the United States dominating other countries and taking advantage of them. And even with that, it could not last. It could not remain the social mobility paradise because at the end of the day, capitalism is a race, and whoever gets to the finish line is the biggest monopoly. And then second place, second biggest monopoly, there are winners in capitalism. Competition has a conclusion, and to the capitalist class that exists, they don't want to share their wealth with anyone. They don't. They think that the wealth that workers have created is theirs, and they don't want to give any pennies away. So, if there was something of a respite for the capitalist class in the 1950s, it's only because they have shouted over the contradictions that still remained even then about the class struggle, apartheid, imperialist war, and imperialist domination.
Absolutely. Well, I think that this was such an amazing conversation about, what's currently happening and what we can look at in the past as like models of anti-fascism, what is fascism, and you guys were so amazing in discussing this because like I'm not as knowledgeable as you two are in this, and it was really great to hear your perspectives and also really connect that with Marxist thought to create a much more whole picture of what we're dealing with and how we can actually effectively fight back against it.
Yeah, like if the fascists of today are afraid enough to weaponize thought, then if they are so endangered by the human brain, then they're finished. Their days are numbered. So all that has to be done is to put our minds together to organize the final blow against these sniveling cowards and their Fortune 500s and their super bombs. I think we can do it.
Period.
Well put. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I again very much appreciate this. This was such a great conversation and at very short notice. But again, thank you guys. I'm gonna ahead and hit